The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Welcome into my State of Mind. I am Dan Yorke. Tonight, Congressman Jim Langevin is my guest. Not only has COVID-19 provided a lot of challenges for all of us, so the Congressman himself, along with his daily rigor to get his job done, has had some other obstacles to overcome, and he'll explain that to you momentarily, simply because I've asked, not because he wants to state his complaint case. That's just not the way he is. But an interesting time for him, no doubt, and certainly having been pulled back to Congress, to the House of Representatives for an emergency vote this past Saturday is a pretty compelling chapter in and of itself. So before we hook up with Jim Langevin, our second district congressman, in an interview that was taped yesterday afternoon, let me show you this from the network in terms of the postal story itself.
And 50. The bill is passed.
The House passed Postal Service legislation that Democrats say is needed to protect the November election.
It was so angering for Americans across the political spectrum that President Trump and Postmaster General DeJoy openly sabotaged the Postal Service in order to prevent people from casting votes through the mail.
The Democrat-sponsored bill calls for the cash-strapped Postal Service to receive an extra $25 billion in funding. House Republicans slammed the legislation, which would also reverse recent Postal Service changes amid concerns about mail-in voting.
This bill is a sham. It is a shame.
Is this part of some vast conspiracy? No. It's part of a decades-long realignment process where the post office is trying to match the needs of the consumers to the post office infrastructure.
After a barrage of criticism, Postmaster General Louis DeJoy said he would halt cost-cutting moves until after the presidential election.
The Postal Service is fully capable and committed to delivering the nation's election mail securely and on time.
On Friday, he told a Senate committee recent delays will not affect mail-in voting. But DeJoy said he would not restore mailboxes and sorting machines that have been removed. President Trump, a vocal critic of mail-in balloting, is now saying he'll deploy law enforcement to polling places.
It's a suppress the vote tactic, as is the suppressing of the ability of the postal system to deliver on its responsibility.
It's unclear if the president has the authority to bring officers to the polls on Election Day.
And so I am always honored to have Congressman Jim Langevin on the program. It is, Jim's story is I think, politics aside, a heroic one in and of itself. The idea that COVID is entered into the game can't make it any easier. First of all, Congressman, welcome. Good to see you. You look as dapper as always.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. Great to be with you today. Thanks for making time having me on the program again.
Before we get into the Postal Service story and the worry about mail voting and all that stuff and the DNC and the RNC, I think people would be interested in knowing, because you know the affection that the electorate has for you, how you're doing during this entire season, and whether this COVID thing and the protections and the carefulness that you've got to do for yourself, how has it affected your getting around, so to speak?
Yeah, it definitely has changed the world for all of us, and we're trying to navigate this new normal, stay safe and healthy, and move forward with our daily lives. Certainly for me, it's changed things. Obviously, for most of us now, we're working from home remotely, and so that is certainly my case. I go into my district office only when necessary. That adds up to maybe once or twice a week. But for Washington, being there for votes, if I have to be there directly, personally, I actually have been driving back and forth. It's a little too risky for me to get out of an airplane right now, since I have underlying health conditions, compromised breathing and asthma. So I've actually been driving back and forth for the most part. Although when we went back just yesterday, on Saturday, for the emergency vote on the postal reform bill, when Speaker Pelosi called us in for an emergency Saturday session, I actually took the train down for the first time. I experimented with that. When you get on the train, you're on an open air platform. On the train itself, there weren't all that many people. There was one person for every 4-person pod. They have the 4 people can seat in one section, so they only had 1 person there. So pretty spaced out, and I wore a mask the whole time and a face shield. So I felt pretty safe doing that, but I'll either drive or probably take the train the next time as well. But it was important to be there, and I'm glad I made the trip.
All right. Well, I know it. People are always amazed about how you're able to navigate, and that remains to be the case. Tell me now about this Postal Service story. Tell me what the House actually did, what you interpret the motive and the product of this legislation to be.
So the reason we were called back for an emergency session on Saturday was to reverse the policy changes and reforms that Postmaster Lou DeJoy had put in place at the United States Postal Service that has slowed down mail delivery. So the things that he has done initially, he's been decommissioning these high-speed sorting machines. We've had that happen here in Rhode Island. I was just with the delegation at a press conference last week, and we spoke to one of the letter carriers, one of the postal workers there, who talked about how 3 of the high-speed sorting machines in Rhode Island were repurposed. There's been mailboxes that have been basically locked and have been removed in certain locations around the country. Overtime has been eliminated. Now, because of public pressure, the Postmaster General has reversed course, and he's saying he's not going to go through with the reforms that he was planning to do, additional reforms. It does not answer the question, though, what he's going to do to reverse what he's already done, because a lot of times, in many ways, the damage has already been done. Mail delivery has been slowed down. So the vote we took on Saturday is to reverse those changes, reinstate service as it was at the beginning of this year, and it would be in place through the end of the pandemic or by the end of this year, whichever comes later. So that's what the goal was. The sad part of it is Mitch McConnell said he's not going to take up the bill, and the president said he would veto it. So I'm frustrated by that. It makes me angry.
Well, I bet. And just, from a personal point of view, for you, taking the train down to cast a vote, which is as important as you think it is, I also find it to be a grave concern. But the idea that you knew this was dead on arrival. I mean, the minute you got in the train to go down there and participate in this vote, you knew it was dead on arrival. That's not, in this day and age, that's not unusual that the Democrats pass something in the House and it's dead on arrival. Does this one make you wince a little bit more because of the urgency of the November election?
Yeah. I guess I'm the eternal optimist, right? And that, I went down there because it was important that Rhode Island's vote was cast, it was heard. I wanted my constituents to voice it, to be heard. When I get a letter letters from over 1,000 people in 1 week concerned about the changes that are being implemented at the post office, when I hear from a constituent, a woman from Coventry, Rhode Island, whose husband has diabetes and is asking me and my office, what do I do if my husband's diabetes medication doesn't get here because the mail is slowed down? Or I have an elderly gentleman, 85-year-old gentleman who was not missed a vote since 1956 and has been voted every election, and he's saying, should I risk going to the polls as opposed to voting by mail because I don't want my vote not to be counted? Those things weigh heavily on me. That's where we have to stop these negative reforms, anything that's slowing the mail delivery down. Now, the Postmaster General felt the public pressure and heard the outcry loud and clear, so he changed course. I'm hoping Mitch McConnell gets the message and he changes course as well and takes up this bill and passes it.
All right. When we come back, we'll talk about the implications of mail voting and, of course, get the Congressman's reflections on the Democratic convention from last week. Stay with us. Congressman Jim Langevin is my guest in My State of Mind. Be right back. Right back with Congressman Jim Langevin, our 2nd District Congressman, of course, and, veteran of the House. Well, I don't care how long you've been around, Jim. This is an incredible time. and the idea that we are going to have a reported such reliance on mail-in voting is very controversial. The president suggests that universal mail-in voting is going to be a disaster. He's already setting the tone for that. You know, here in Rhode Island, you have to apply for your mail ballot and then receive it. I'm not sure whether the Secretary of State is going to make any adjustments there. So my questions for you are, do you perceive that we will, in Rhode Island, stay with the way we usually do it, with more people accessing the pretty loose application process for a mail ballot, or will we join the fracas of what's going to be the universal, meaning send out ballots to all the homes, you know, registered in the district? What's your take?
Yeah, so I certainly do support voting by mail for people that would feel more comfortable doing that. I would just tell people, get your vote in, get your ballot in early. I want to remind people that we do have the September primary coming up on September 8th. I have a primary that day, so I certainly want to once again ask people for their vote. I've always been grateful for the support that people have shown, the trust they've placed in me, and I want to ask for that support once again. But then, of course, we have the November general election on November 3rd. You know, I give a lot of credit to Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea. She's been trying to do everything she can to make the mail ballot system as streamlined as possible. When you apply for your mail ballot now, you no longer have to have the two signatures or have your signature notarized. The federal court ruled in favor. In fact, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld the lower court ruling that those signature requirements would be waived. People can also, by the way, go to the Board of Canvassers and vote in person before the election. So this in the weeks leading up, if you don't want to vote by mail, if you want to go in person, you can do that right at your Board of Canvassers in your local city and town. And there's going to be maximum precautions taken place at the polls on election day to make sure that people vote. But it's important. This election is the most important election of our lifetime, and I hope people get out there and make sure their vote is heard.
How do you weigh in on the president's concern in 30 states where there won't be any pre-application? It just the ballots will just be sent. Do you find any legitimacy in his concern there?
I don't find legitimacy in President Trump's concerns. And by case in point, President Trump himself is voting by mail. So I think it's hypocritical for him to be criticizing mail-in ballots when he himself is doing it. Look, other states have been, because you do this as a matter of routine. Oregon, for example, years ago eliminated in-person voting. They don't have polling locations anymore. They do all vote by mail, and they have people that have record turnout. So I'm not saying it's the preferred way. I still like the idea of people going to the polls on election day, but I, for one, am going to vote by mail. I've already voted and sent my ballot in by mail already for the September 8th primary. I'll likely be doing the same thing for the November general election, but we need to remind ourselves that we are in a pandemic. It's too easy sometimes to think that, oh, I'm not going to get the virus. It's not going to happen to me. And when people let their guard down, that's when bad things can happen. So it's important to take precautions. I think voting by mail is a good option. If you want to go to the polls, to the Board of Canvassers, that's a good option. And if you're going to go to the polls, you can do that as well. Just be appropriate, wear a mask, and do frequent hand washing, as public health officials are recommending.
All right, so when we come back, let's get to the Congressman's view on what happened with the DNC, Joe Biden's candidacy, Kamala Harris, and all of that. Congressman Jim Langevin, right back with him. So welcome back to my State of Mind. Congressman Jim Langevin, of course, needs no introduction. All right, quick takes. Let's run through the politics here. Joe Biden's performance was
inspiring. I was so thrilled with his speech and his choosing Kamala Harris as a vice presidential nominee, first woman of color, as a major party candidate for president or vice president. And I'm thrilled with the team. So Joe Biden is going to be the president that we need right now, and I'm honored to support him.
the virtual nature of this thing, clumsy on the first night, got better as the week went along. I mean, clearly, you have to feel the same way I do, that there's just so much missing in
Sure.
those of us who've enjoyed going to the conventions for all this time. What was your gut telling you about the detachment of the virtual aspect of it?
Yeah, we're all struggling to get used to this new normal, and doing things virtually, it is definitely not the same. I definitely prefer in-person interactions. You know, when I taped your show in person, I enjoy that much more. And the same thing with, going to party conventions, hearing the speeches personally. I've been to several conventions. It's exciting to actually be there with other people who are as jazzed up as you are and I am with respect to the moment and hearing the speeches. But I'd have to say the words that Joe Biden spoke were just so important. He talks about his background, his experience, how he wants to lead the country forward and unite us and focus on the light and not the darkness. That's the kind of president we need right now to heal our country in the divisions.
In Rhode Island, it's the whole thing's fait accompli when it comes to a national presidential election. So we're really not in the middle of the hunt. But what would you say about? I thought Joe Biden's most impressive moments were when he practically talked about how he would engage the virus. And it might be Donald Trump's end game, that he wouldn't wear a mask, that he wouldn't buy into this thing, that he didn't centralize enough of the response from a federal point of view, that he keeps trying to fight the data rather than accept it and handle this thing from a complete total management. I thought that Biden's at least outline of how he would handle it might be the thing that gets him across the finish line. I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right on point. That Joe Biden's going to have a plan for how to protect the country against the pandemic, and certainly requiring universal mask wearing is a part of that. He's going to rely on public health officials and their best advice, their best guidance, listening to people like Tony Fauci, what he has to say. And I've had Tony Fauci testifying for me on a number of occasions for more than a decade. I consider him a friend. I trust him. He's authentic. He knows what he's talking about. President Trump dismisses Tony Fauci and the advice that he gives. It's really sad that at the critical time like this, that Donald Trump is the person that's in the White House as the leader of the free world. He's failed in his leadership. It really has been almost a dereliction of duty and how he has not properly led the country in the way that he should. Not exercising and using the the Defense Production Act, for example, to acquire PPE and properly distribute it. The same thing with other aspects of what the Defense Production Act could be used for. I know Joe Biden will do the right thing. People can trust and put confidence in his leadership. This pandemic and the way Donald Trump has failed to lead will probably be his downfall. Joe Biden will step up to the moment. And if you look at other countries and why they've done so well, because they've had much better leadership and coordinated plans than what the United States has had, sadly.
Yet, don't forget, this base is still as solid as it's ever been for Donald Trump. This base, Jim, you've followed and been involved in politics all your life. Have you ever seen a more predictably loyal political base? I mean, look, if you made any major screw ups, you'd shake it. Look, you've been a success story in your elected life, but if you pulled half the crap that Donald Trump did, you'd lose a lot of constituents. He has a base that does not move. What's your reflection on that?
It is remarkable. You're right, spot on when you talk about how immune Donald Trump has been to any criticism. I've never seen Teflon like he has it. And you heard the tape of his sister describing how she looks at Donald Trump and the lies he tells, the fact that he's doesn't believe in much of anything. It really is remarkable that he's been able to survive and got through, or even half the things that would take down anybody else. I can't explain it. All I just know is we need somebody in the White House right now that values the truth, that will look you in the eye and tell you what he really believes, and he's going to lead by example. So all of these things, Joe Biden's years of experience, the way that I think he will be an important president for the moment, the time that we need him to be, the leadership that we need him to show. I think Joe Biden is the right person.
All right, listen, I'm going to let you go. Final word for the district during these tough times?
I would say that hang in there, that we are going to get through this time together. We are doing everything we can on the federal level to help our individuals and families get through this, whether it's the additional $1,200 that we first provided with the stimulus funds, and then additional support for the unemployed, helping also with the PPP program that helps small businesses get through this rough patch. More is needed. We passed the HEROES Act. Mitch McConnell again hasn't taken that up, but we are actively negotiating. We're trying to get another compromise bill that the Republicans and Democrats can support, and it's going to provide the help that people need. But in the meantime, stay safe, listen to public health officials, wear your masks in public, wash your hands, frequent hand washing, or use hand sanitizer, and be safe.
Jim, you too. Thank you. Congressman Jim Langevin, final word, and we come back. Stay with us. No matter how you vote, left or right, Democrat, Republican, you've got to acknowledge, and most folks do, that Jim Langevin is an inspiration, and COVID-19 certainly doesn't diminish that thought. Every day is a challenge, and he never complains. We have a lot going on this week with the Republican National Convention. Donald Trump speaking on Thursday, of course. Tomorrow night, we'll be talking to Bob Walsh from the larger teacher union here in the state, the NEA, about their perspective on opening the schools. Back to you tomorrow at 3 until 6 on WPRO as well. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.